Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, True Scary Stories. Where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it in your country? Have you shared my channel with your friends yet, or are you keeping these whispers all to yourself? Settle in, get that blanket tucked under your chin, and try not to look too closely at the darkness pooling in the corner of your room. Tonight, we're not just talking about a rainy night, we're talking about a storm so thick and dark it feels less like weather and more like a heavy, suffocating cloth draped over the world. The kind of rain that makes the world outside your window look less like a familiar street and more like a melted watercolor painting, all blurry edges and deep, hungry shadows. The story tonight involves a journey you take, guided by a map you found tucked into a forgotten book. A map scrawled with impossibly precise directions to a place you swore didn't exist, a village called Eversleep. It's a beautifully ironic name, isn't it? Because in Eversleep, no one ever actually sleeps, at least not completely. You'll be visiting a place that has engineered a world without the luxury of unconsciousness, and if you think you're going to get a good night's rest after hearing this, well, that's what we call hubris. It's that moment right before the main character decides to check the basement. Don't worry, you probably won't survive this story, but at least your death will be well narrated. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me your location and local time down in the comments. I always love to see how many time zones we're creeping into. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that low, unsettling hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your journey begins naturally with a terrible sense of unease. You're holding a damp piece of parchment, the ink bleeding slightly from the rain outside your car window, and it directs you to turn off the main highway onto an unpaved gravel road that vanishes immediately into a wall of old-growth forest. Well, the instructions are obsessive in their detail. After the third stand of weeping birch, when the gravel turns to wet shale, you will find the path. It's less like a map and more like a cryptic ritual. You know the kind of feeling, right? That little internal voice that screams, "Turn back." This is the opening scene of every bad choice you've ever made, but the quiet, intellectual curiosity, the one that always wins, just forces your foot down on the accelerator. You crave the secret the map promises. A community that lives under a continuous, synchronized wakefulness schedule. It sounds like a cult, an experiment, or perhaps the only logical solution to a problem you can't yet imagine. The reason you're here, chasing this impossible rumor, is that you've heard enough of the world's quiet horrors to know that the deepest fears often emerge when the lights are out. One of the foundational concepts of psychological horror, a mainstream scary fact, is the real-world phenomenon of sleep paralysis, where the mind wakes up before the body, leaving the victim fully conscious but utterly immobile, often accompanied by terrifying hallucinations of malevolent presences, known colloquially as the old hag. It's a moment where you are entirely alone and completely powerless, and it happens naturally in millions of safe, ordinary bedrooms every night. You wonder if Eversleep was born from a desire to never ever be caught in that state of vulnerability again, to prevent that brief, terrifying window when the guard is down. As you navigate the twisting forest road, dodging branches the wind tears loose, and listening to the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of your worn-out windshield wipers, you begin to think about sleep itself. It's a necessary surrender, a nightly rehearsal for death, but also a moment of intense, unprotected processing. There is an obscure or fringe horror tidbit about this surrender, an old Russian superstition known as the dream interloper. This lore suggests that when you fall asleep, your consciousness momentarily vacates your body, and if you are sleeping on your back, particularly facing an open window or a mirror, a parasitic entity can slip into the empty space. They don't hurt the body immediately, they simply observe and absorb your deepest fears, using your mind as a staging ground for future psychic attacks. The only defense, they say, is to sleep on your side, curled inward, presenting the smallest possible window of entry. The people of Eversleep seem to have decided that the best way to prevent the dream interloper is not to curl up, but simply to lock the door and throw away the key. The narrative of this village feels profoundly unnatural, yet compellingly practical. It's a logistical nightmare, a clockwork society running on caffeine and collective anxiety. You wonder how they sustain it, who runs the show, and more importantly, what happens when someone misses a shift. You briefly consider the absurdity of it all. What do you call a community that never sleeps? A nightmare waiting to happen. That's dark joke number one. The road finally spits you out of the tree line. The rain hasn't lessened, but the dense, claustrophobic darkness of the forest gives way to a shocking amount of light. The village isn't rustic or antique. It's a cluster of squat, concrete structures, illuminated by high intensity, colorless lamps that hiss faintly in the rain. Every window is lit, and through them you can see movement. The slow, methodical, almost robotic movement of people. As you pull the car to a stop near what looks like a community hall, the largest, most aggressively lit building, the air around you begins to thrum. It's not just the rain and the wind, it's a sound deep and subsonic that vibrates in the chest cavity, almost perfectly matching the anxious beat of your own heart. It's the sound the map promised, the rhythm of a place that never rests. It's the constant, low siren's hum of Eversleep. You reach for the door handle, and for the first time you consider the true nature of this community's sleeplessness. Researchers disagree on whether perpetual wakefulness leads to a gradual enhancement of cognitive function or a complete, irreversible degradation into paranoid psychosis. You're about to find out which outcome has been achieved here firsthand. You step out of the car. The rain instantly soaks your coat, but the cold is secondary to the weird pressure of the hum. The joke is, you might finally learn to appreciate your noisy neighbors. At least they only run the washing machine at 3 a.m. and don't try to run their entire lives in synchronized, non-stop mechanical rhythm. The sound feels less like an energy source and more like a barrier, a wall of pure noise designed to keep something out, or perhaps keep something in check. You notice, amidst the mechanical hum, a low-slung, almost imperceptible clicking sound, like thousands of microscopic clock mechanisms all winding simultaneously. You stand there, looking at this brightly lit, rain-swept concrete block of perpetual vigilance, and you take your first deep lungful of the charged electric air of Eversleep. You think, I guess I'm in the right place, because I'm already tired, and the day hasn't even begun. That's dark joke number 2, and it barely cuts through the tension. You need to find the overseer. You need to understand the schedule. You need to know why they never sleep, but most of all, you need to know what they are trying to keep awake. You realize the true horror is that your arrival has likely been on their schedule for weeks. They knew you were coming, they've been waiting, and they are wide awake. You close the car door, the thud sound quickly swallowed by the omnipresent heavy thrum. You move toward the large building, the only sound the crunch of the wet shale beneath your boots. A sound that feels horribly loud and disruptive in this strangely silent, hyper-vigilant village. You're about to knock, but the door slides open just as your hand reaches it, revealing a figure standing in the bright fluorescent light. They are pale, dressed in simple gray coveralls, and their eyes are wide, unblinking, and entirely expectant. The figure is motionless, perfectly framed by the aggressively bright light spilling from the hall. You notice immediately that their eyes are not just wide, they are unnaturally dry, lacking the glossy sheen that suggests blinking. It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about the level of controlled, focused wakefulness maintained here. You step inside, leaving the downpour behind, and the door slides shut with a sigh of pressurized air, silencing the noise of the rain, but amplifying the deep, resonating thrum that fills the hall. It's a physical force, a vibration that settles in the teeth and the back of the skull, a constant low-frequency pressure. The figure, a woman, finally moves, tilting her head with an almost imperceptible crack of her neck. "You are precisely 45 minutes late," she says, her voice a low, even monotone that seems designed to not disturb the resonant hum. "The transition was scheduled for 02,000. You will have to make up the latency in the processing cycle." This isn't a warm welcome, it's a dry, mathematical integration into a system. You realize that your initial belief that this place was running on human anxiety was only half right. It's running on an almost mechanical precision of human attention. This building, the central hall, is the heart of Eversleep. It's vast and circular, dominated by two things. The first is a massive, multi-tiered digital clock display that takes up an entire wall, showing not only the time but also color-coded status bars for hundreds of named individuals, all of them fluctuating between active green, rest cycle, blue, and transition phase, amber. The second dominating feature is the source of the persistent noise, a large, polished, metallic cylinder sitting dead center in the room, pulsing faintly with the dull red light. It looks like a high-end server rack mixed with an ornate silent bell. The overseer indicates the clock with a gesture. "I am the chief overseer, and you are now part of the rotation. You will be assigned to a 4-hour wake shift followed by a 2-hour rest cycle, followed by a 4-hour wake shift. The shift never ends. The shift must never end." You try to crack a nervous joke, a release of the building tension. "So, is this like the ultimate co-working space? Do you at least have good coffee?" The overseer does not smile, nor does she frown. She processes the question. "Caffeine is highly regulated. Humorous deviation is permitted during the final 30 minutes of awake shift only. Your current latency period does not permit levity. Dark joke number 3, failed. You feel like you've been scolded by a spreadsheet. As you look around, you see the movement you noticed from outside. There are maybe 20 people in the hall, all moving with the same deliberate, almost practiced slowness. They are meticulously cleaning surfaces, sorting supplies, organizing perfectly stacked documents, or simply staring at the clock, waiting for their green status bar to click over to blue. They are vigilant but not necessarily productive in a human sense. Their activity seems to be a means to an end, a way to occupy the mind to prevent something. You feel an intellectual shudder. This isn't just about avoiding sleep, it's about controlling the mind's entire idle state. You remember reading about a chilling historical precedent for state-mandated activity, a mainstream scary fact concerning the Soviet Union's psychological interrogation techniques during the Cold War. One method was known as the sensory overload technique, where subjects were kept awake for days on end, forced to listen to constant, monotonous noise, often paired with bright, unchanging lights, until their grasp on reality fractured and they became entirely suggestible. The purpose wasn't just to extract information, but to completely erase and reprogram the personality. The relentless vigilance of Eversleep feels like a self-imposed, collective form of this psychological torture, but for a reason far more terrifying than political secrets. The overseer begins to walk, and you follow, the polished concrete floor reflecting the harsh, unblinking light. "We do not prevent sleep to achieve greater efficiency," she explains, her voice almost whispering against the hum. "We prevent sleep because of the vulnerability it creates, the opportunity it presents." She points out the cylinder, the source of the relentless vibration. This device is the siren's hum. It operates on a precise frequency to disrupt the hypnagogic state. This is the obscure or fringe horror tidbit you pick up next. In certain spiritual traditions, the hypnagogic state, that brief, transitional period between wakefulness and sleep, is considered the easiest time for spirits or non-physical entities to interact with the living. Known sometimes as the gray veil, it's believed to be the point where the mind's defenses are lowered, allowing for genuine possession or psychic draining. Eversleep's entire infrastructure is built around creating a constant, low-level mental white noise to ensure no one ever truly crosses that threshold. They are not fighting sleep itself, they are fighting the transition. The schedule, the overseer continues, indicating the clock, is what maintains the mental barrier. When one consciousness falters, another is immediately activated to create a seamless wall of collective wakefulness. She walks you past a series of doors leading off the central hall. One is marked processing, another sustenance, and a third rest cycle chambers. You see people in the sustenance room mechanically chewing nutrient paste from identical silver trays, their eyes still wide, their focus still clearly elsewhere. You think, they look about as excited as me when I realize I have to work tomorrow. Dark joke number 1, successful in your mind only. Historians still argue whether the concept of the collective unconscious, as theorized by Jung, represents a beneficial shared resource of human knowledge or a vast, vulnerable, contiguous psychic landscape easily exploited by non-human predators. The people of Eversleep seem to have settled on the latter. They've decided their collective mind, when unguarded by sleep, is a fortress, but when exposed, it becomes a single, delicious target. You are led to a small storage room to pick up your standard issue equipment. Gray coveralls identical to everyone else's, a small black handheld counter, and a vial of colorless liquid labeled stabilizer. It helps shorten the necessary phase of physical recuperation and reduces the incidence of deep state dreams. You are not here to dream, you are here to recover the capacity to remain present. You pocket the vial, feeling its chilling coldness seep through the fabric of your pants, and your first wake shift begins in 15 minutes. You will be assigned to Zone 4, ambient monitoring. Your task is simply to ensure the ambient activity levels of the other villagers do not drop below the 70% threshold. If a person's status bar turns amber for more than 3 minutes, you are to immediately escort them to the transition chamber. You are now responsible for the stability of a section of the wall. You're starting to feel a dull ache behind your eyes, the onset of a profound fatigue that seems to be accelerated by the omnipresent hum. It's almost as if the air itself is laced with exhaustion. You consider the absurdity of this new job description. Monitoring other people's level of wakefulness is quite a task. I bet the yearly review process here is just brutal. Sorry, Bob, your focus score dropped to 68%. You're fired, and probably possessed. That's dark joke number 2, and you suppress a dry, weary chuckle. The overseer leads you back to the center of the hall, near the massive clock. She points to your designated post, a small metallic stool bolted to the floor with a monitor facing the room. Our status bar is already active on the main display. Outsider, active, green. The reality of the schedule hits you. The endless loop, 4 hours up, 2 hours down, 4 hours up, 2 hours down. No nights, no days, just shifts, just consciousness. Just the hum. The chief overseer, whose name you learn is Alara, gives you a thin, laminated card listing the rules of mandatory wakefulness. You're starting to realize that the rules aren't designed for efficiency or productivity, they're designed for distraction. They are intricate, numerous, and deliberately complex, keeping your mind occupied with bureaucratic minutiae. Rule 1. The use of personal reflective surfaces is prohibited. Rule 4. Vocalization must be limited to shift reporting and required instruction, maintaining a frequency below the ambient hum threshold. Rule of N. The activity meter must never be allowed to drop below 70% in any zone and must not exceed 95% in any zone, as excessive activity can indicate an over-reliance on stimulants, which introduces systemic risk. It's a Goldilocks zone of conscious effort. As Alara walks away to her own station, you settle onto the hard, metallic stool at your Zone 4 post. You look at the black handheld counter. It's not just a timer, it's a distraction device. It cycles through a series of meaningless, complex mathematical equations you have to solve in your head, constantly forcing the brain into a state of low-level critical engagement. I finally found a job where being bad at math could literally get you killed. That's dark joke number 1. Siren's hum is definitely increasing your fatigue, not lessening it. It's a rhythmic, insidious attack on the inner ear, designed to exhaust the parts of the brain that try to filter it out. You watch the villagers in your zone. They are all engaged in pointless, low-stakes tasks, polishing the same metal rail, counting identical sheets of paper, or watching a small, repetitive mechanical device cycle on a loop. You notice the one mainstream scary fact about their demeanor, the marathon monotony effect. In documented cases of extreme psychological stress and forced sensory deprivation, or overload as here, the brain starts to generate its own stimulus to compensate for the boredom, leading to hallucinations, temporal distortion, on a profound inability to distinguish between the real and the imagined. The villagers are moving, but their eyes have that faraway, slightly blurred look of someone on the verge of a full mental break. Their activity is merely the scaffolding holding their consciousness together. You look at the digital clock wall. The hundreds of named status bars are a terrifying mosaic of green and blue. The seamlessness of the transition is what keeps the system functioning. When one person's green bar fades, an alarm-like pulse instantly activates the next person's bar from blue to green. There is no gap. The light, the noise, and the movement are a constant, unending wave of vigilance. Then you spot the door, the one that is never mentioned in the rotation. It's set into the curved wall opposite the clock, reinforced with thick, black metal, devoid of any markers or handles, and sound dampened to an impossible degree. A very old man, his skin like dried parchment and his shoulders slumped with a profound, bone-deep weariness, sits on a tiny wooden stool directly in front of it. He doesn't look at the clock, he doesn't look at the people, he just stares at the empty space a few inches in front of the door. This must be the core secret. This leads you to an obscure or fringe horror tidbit about the danger of thresholds. Shipwist T. All. In ancient Germanic and Slavic folklore, there is a belief in the Dervergar's gap, which states that doors, window frames, and especially sealed, internal thresholds are the weakest points between the physical world and the underworld. It was considered dangerous to stand directly in a doorway, or to lay one's head on the threshold of a house, because the gap between one space and the next was where malevolent spirits were most likely to reside, waiting for an opportunity to pull the unwary across. The man guarding that single door is not guarding a room. He is guarding the weakest point in the entire village's mental fortress. You try to focus on your counter, solving the meaningless equations. 470-24, Schloss 10-24. The answer is irrelevant. The effort is everything. Yoff. 70-24 2000 war. You realize that your training here is not to learn their rules, but to simply survive them, to stay active enough not to become a liability. You watch a woman in your zone, Zone 4, who is meticulously arranging small, smooth river stones on a table. She picks one up, places it down, then picks up the next one. Her status bar is a steady 82%. She's the definition of pointless vigilance. Researchers disagree on whether extreme, prolonged sensory monotony combined with sleep deprivation, effectively induces a temporary form of psychosis, or if it merely reveals pre-existing, latent mental vulnerabilities that are normally suppressed by the natural rhythm of waking and dreaming. The villagers look less psychotic and more emptied out. It's as if their entire emotional and personal landscape has been deliberately hollowed out to make room for pure, sustained attention. They are shells, and the shell is the defense. Alara walks past your post, her footsteps silent. All lock. She taps the edge of your monitor with a single, perfectly manicured finger. Your internal equation score is 47%, she drones. You are allowing your mind to drift. That is where the vulnerability begins. You correct yourself, forcing your mind back to the calculation. You realize her awareness of your score is not through observation, but through the seamless network that monitors everything. The village doesn't just run on shifts, it runs on surveillance. You try another joke, just to test the waters to see if anything human remains beneath the gray exterior. So, if I solve all these equations, do I get a nap? You receive no response, but the woman with the stones pauses for a split second, her eyes flicking toward you and then immediately back to the river stone she is currently polishing. A flicker of something, amusement, fear, crosses her face. You realize that jokes are not just against the rules, they are a sign of uncontrolled mental activity. A tiny act of rebellion in a place where rebellion is synonymous with doom. You spend the next 2 hours watching the woman and the stones. You watch another man meticulously check the tension on a bundle of wires, also a pointless, endless task. You monitor the clock, watching the green bar of a man named Kale slowly dip toward amber. You find yourself physically leaning forward, urging the main to maintain his vigilance. A weird sense of collective pressure settling on your shoulders. Kale's bar dips to 73%, then 72%, then 71%. You feel a cold knot in your stomach. This is your first responsibility. He is checking the tension of the wires. He stops, his hand hovering over the bundle. For a moment, his eyes close, a twitch of pure, desperate human exhaustion. The bar flashes 70%. You stand up, your heart hammering against the hum. You walk toward him, placing a hand on his shoulder. It's bony and thin beneath the coveralls. Kale, you whisper, the sound immediately feeling too loud, too disruptive. Activity, he jerks awake, his eyes snapping open. They are bloodshot, but they are open. He doesn't look at you, he looks at his hands and starts checking the wire tension again, but faster, more frantically. His status bar instantly jumps to 78%. You step back, breathing a sigh of relief. You realize you just saved him from the transition chamber, or whatever horrors lie within. You saved the system, and that's when the third, driest joke pops into your head. I wonder if the village has a suggestion box. I bet it's just full of resignation letters from 10 years ago. The realization is stark. You are no longer an outsider. You are a cog in the machine that is keeping the thing in the quiet room, the one guarded by the old, weary man from waking up. Your shift continues, and the hum pulses. The exhaustion you feel is not the familiar, heavy lethargy of a late night. It's a specific stinging fatigue that sits directly behind the eyes, a constant psychic scratch. You are now 4 hours into your first wake shift, and the oppressive vigilance has settled deep into your bones. The rhythm of the village is hypnotic. The methodical, silent movement of the workers, the flickering lights, the unceasing, deep-seated thrum of the siren's hum. It's a lullaby that screams, "Wake up." Your task ambient monitoring has become a form of meditation. You watch the villagers, cataloging their pointless activities. The Riverstone woman is now stacking them into perfectly balanced pyramids. Kale is still testing wire tension. Everyone is doing, but no one is achieving. The purpose is simply to maintain conscious effort. You understand now, the activity is the price of admission, the offering to the machine to keep the shared consciousness high enough to deflect whatever lies beyond the threshold. You remember an obscure or fringe horror tidbit known as the nocturnal architect lore. This superstition claims that particularly powerful nightmares are not random firings of the brain, but are carefully constructed psychic environments built by dormant, ethereal entities. These architects use the unguarded mind during REM sleep as raw material, shaping fears and traumas into a sustainable form they can inhabit and feed on. If the people here were allowed to sleep normally, they wouldn't just be resting, they'd be offering up their subconscious minds as construction sites. The entire village is a giant, noisy, brightly lit, no vacancy sign for psychic parasites. As your shift drags on, the hum begins to distort. Not audibly, but perceptually, it starts to sound like it's saying something. Or rather, not saying anything, but suggesting a single, comforting word, Rest, just the word repeated in the vibrating pressure. You have to shake your head violently to clear the auditory hallucination. You look at your status bar, still green, 88%. You are fighting your own biology, and that makes you an integral, if temporary, part of the continuous wall. The sheer scale of the community's commitment to this task is frightening. You recall a mainstream scary fact concerning the history of the catacombs of Paris. When the city's cemeteries became dangerously overcrowded in the 18th century, the bodies of over 6 million people were exhumed and moved to underground tunnels. This was not a quick task. It was a decades-long, meticulous, bone-by-bone transfer. The effort required, the organization, the manpower, the sheer commitment to an endless, grim task parallels the systematic, unending shift work of Eversleep. It's the same terrifying dedication to a collective, morbid maintenance project. The only difference is that the catacombs are peaceful now. This place is definitely not. Dark joke number 1. The old man guarding the sealed door across the room has not moved. You check the time, 3 hours and 50 minutes into your shift. You feel a desperate need to know what he is guarding, what the village fears more than exhaustion. It must be something so terrible that permanent wakefulness is the preferable outcome. You try to distract yourself by considering the social dynamics of this non-sleeping society. I wonder how they date. Hey, you're cute. Want to spend our 4-hour active cycle staring at a wall together? Dark joke number 2. The scholarly debate phrasing surfaces as you look at the clock, watching the bars shift and flow. Researchers disagree on whether the human body can ever fully recover from acute sleep deprivation without entering the deepest stages of non-REM and REM sleep, or if the partial, medicated rest cycle practiced in Eversleep simply delays the inevitable, catastrophic system failure. The pale, gaunt faces of the older villagers suggest the latter. They look like portraits painted on stretched, brittle canvas. Suddenly, Kale's activity bar, which had been stabilized, plummets. 75%, 72%, 68%. He's still holding the wire, but he's swaying slightly, his head drooping. You move fast, crossing the polished floor with a quick, urgent stride that feels foreign in this slow-motion environment. You grab his shoulder again, whispering harshly, "Kale." "The chamber." He is heavier this time, his body already going slack. I can't," he mumbles, his voice thick with the deep, gluey sound of imminent surrender. "You have to," you hiss, half pulling him toward the transition chamber door, a plain white door just behind your post. The bar hits 65%. You drag him inside. The transition chamber is small, sound-dampened, and contains a single chair that looks suspiciously like a simplified electric chair, all straps and metal. You strap him in quickly, following the precise steps Alara outlined earlier. He doesn't resist. He's already gone. The final, crucial step is the injector. You slam the button. A thick, milky liquid is pumped into his arm. His body spasms once, sharply, and then relaxes, eyes still open but rolled back slightly. The monitor inside the chamber instantly flashes forced rest cycle initiated. You realize this liquid is the real stabilizer, the one that chemically enforces a shallow, controlled nap, preventing the deep dive into vulnerability. You rush back to your post. Your own activity bar has dipped to 77% from the adrenaline and the exertion. You look at the clock. The entire incident took 1 minute and 14 seconds. The system is brutal in its efficiency. You look over at the old guard. He didn't even twitch. He didn't care about Kale. He only cares about the door. Your shift ends with a soft chime from your handheld counter, followed by a sudden wave of relief so intense it's almost sickening. You are directed to the rest cycle chamber. You grab your vial of stabilizer from your coveralls. You look back at the clock. Your bar turns blue. A new person, a young woman, takes your place at the Zone 4 post immediately, her movements already mechanical and precise. You haven't even left and the gap is already filled. The wall is seamless. As you enter your rest cycle chamber, a small gray box of a room with a sterile cot, you think, well, that was a real wake-up call. Too bad I have to go to sleep now. Dark joke number 3. You lie down, swallowing the chemical liquid. It tastes like copper and pure exhaustion. As the low hum of the village washes over you, fighting the drug, you feel yourself sinking, not into restful sleep, but into a heavily guarded, shallow state of vulnerability. You are now officially a part of the rotation, and the only escape is system failure. You wake, or rather, you are abruptly pulled from the chemical twilight exactly 2 hours later by a jarring, high-pitched chime built into the cot. The The stabilizer leaves you feeling gritty, dehydrated, and acutely unrested. Your mind is present, but your body is still protesting the lack of genuine sleep. You have the metallic aftertaste of the drug and the faint ringing memory of the siren's hum in your ears, back to the 4-hour grind. Your second wake shift is in Zone 2, a smaller area dedicated to the preservation of the village's history. This is where you encounter Alara, the overseer, again. She is meticulously cleaning an ancient, leather-bound book, her eyes still unnaturally dry. "The system requires context," she states, without looking up. "You will assist in the cataloging of the archives of vigilance. It is important that you understand the root of the blight." The archives are stored in a cold, dry room, thankfully shielded somewhat from the aggressive main hall lighting. The air here smells of aged paper and something faintly mineral, like chalk dust and rust. Alara shows you the source material, a collection of journals, codices, and illuminated manuscripts that predate the concrete structures and the central humming cylinder. These texts are the history of the blight, the event that birthed Eversleep. This is where you find the core, terrifying truth, a mainstream scary fact. The texts describe a kind of collective insomnia that swept through the original settlement centuries ago. But it wasn't ordinary sleeplessness. It was a state of being too awake, a profound mental clarity that came with an unbearable side effect, the ability to perceive the invisible, non-Euclidean geometry of the void. The sleepless victims didn't just see the world, they saw the dark, impossible spaces between things, and they realized those spaces were not empty. This led to mass mental collapse, not from fatigue, but from relentless, horrific observation. The village was being eaten by what they saw when their minds were clear. One of the oldest texts, a codex written in a fading, spidery script, refers to the blight not as an illness, but as a cognitive predator, an obscure or fringe horror tidbit rooted in ancient European demonology. This specific lore suggests that there exists a class of beings that feed not on fear or souls, but on the potential energy of unguarded human thought, particularly the rapid, unstructured processing that occurs during deep sleep. If enough people in a given area enter REM sleep simultaneously, it creates a massive focused reservoir of mental energy, a perfect, irresistible feast. The villagers weren't trying to stay awake, they were trying to prevent the simultaneous energy signature that would call the predator. They built the shift system and the siren's hum to keep the mental energy scattered, weak, and perpetually defended. The blight took a physical form briefly, Alara whispers, running a cloth over a stained page. In the dreams of the last generation that slept, they called it the one who waits for the lullaby. When the first victims finally succumbed to the true deep sleep, their minds were consumed instantly. They woke as empty vessels, still living but without consciousness, shells that attacked the still sleeping. You look at the rigid movements of the villagers outside the archival room. They are not merely vigilant, they are actively avoiding becoming hollow. You feel a fresh surge of adrenaline. This isn't just about personal survival. It's about participating in a desperate, centuries-long psychic war. You try to lighten the mood with a truly awful joke. So, basically, they invented a system to avoid paying the psychic rent. Tough critics, these ancient predators. Dark joke number 1, perfectly dry. Alara just stares at the smudge on the page and then wipes it away. The scholarly debate phrasing appears again as you consider the ethics. Historians still argue whether the extreme measures taken by the original survivors, including the forced, chemically induced shallow rest and the elimination of all art and poetry to reduce imaginative vulnerability, were necessary acts of preservation or an overreaction that ultimately destroyed the human spirit in exchange for physical longevity. You look at Alara's pale, unexpressive face, and you'd bet money on the latter. Your task is to catalog the names of the original vigilance pioneers, the founders of the rotation. You spend an hour staring at lists of names, dates, and shift assignments, realizing the horrifying continuity of it all. You read a chilling entry, vigilance priority, unsure 0 simultaneous dream state events. The cost of a shared thought outweighs the cost of a life. You ask Alara about the old man at the door. What is the purpose of that door, and why is that man not part of the standard rotation? Alara's eyes finally meet yours. They are the same washed-out gray as her coveralls. That, she states, her voice barely a breath, is the quiet room. It is the last fail-safe. It is the place where the unrecoverable go. And the guard is not part of the rotation because he is already too far gone to be of use to the system. He exists solely as an immovable physical obstacle. He is the commitment itself, embodied. You think of the old man's profound exhaustion, the way his body seems to be held together by pure willpower and nothing else. He's definitely due for a vacation. Maybe a spa day that ends with a sudden, peaceful death. Dark joke number 2. Elara hands you a small metallic rod. This is a secondary tensioning device. You will use it on the door of the quiet room once every 8 hours. It is an exercise in futility, but the act of performing the task is essential for the system's stability. It is a psychological reinforcement. You now have a pointless, repetitive task that draws your attention directly to the biggest secret of the village. The system knows exactly how to manage curiosity. Make it mandatory. You take the rod. It's heavy, cold, and strangely warm from the ambient hum. You are being drawn closer to the secret with every action, every non-sleep cycle. The rhythm continues, the stacking of stones, the tensioning of wires, the solving of meaningless equations, and now, the tensioning of nothing. You feel another dry joke creeping up. The only thing scarier than this village is the idea of being stuck here without Wi-Fi. That's real horror. Dark joke number 3. You know that soon, the vigilance will break down, and you will be the one who sees the crack. Your assigned duty is now the most psychologically demanding, the pointless tensioning of the quiet room door. You approach the old man, who sits like a statue of perpetual misery. His name, you learn from the clock wall, is Elder Gorn. He doesn't acknowledge your presence. His eyes are milky, glazed over, fixed on the absolute nothingness just past his knees. The door itself is terrifying in its simplicity. It has no seams, no locks visible from the outside, just a smooth black metal surface that absorbs the light and the hum. You find the small, barely visible aperture for your metallic rod. You insert the rod and twist. It engages with absolutely nothing. There is no resistance, no click, no sound of metal tightening. It's just the mechanical repetition of the idea of securing the seal. The mainstream scary fact that comes to mind as you perform this task is the Gate of the Sun in Bolivia. This ancient megalithic stone archway is carved with impossible precision and features a figure, often interpreted as a deity, with tear-like elements carved into its face. Researchers have noted that the gate is an astronomical clock marking solar events. But the chilling detail is that the entire structure is seemingly built not for the world, but as a perpetual, impossible marker facing a void. The quiet room door feels the same way. It's a physical manifestation of an ontological boundary, a place where reality is forced to stop. You complete the tensioning, a small hollow clunk being the only reward. Elder Gorn does not move. He is still gazing into the near distance. You feel a profound sense of pity for him, and a growing understanding of why he is kept out of the rotation. The village's defense is active, high-energy vigilance. Elder Gorn is passive, low-energy commitment. He represents the line that cannot be crossed. He is the ultimate quiet act of sacrifice. You attempt to speak to him, keeping your voice low, close to the hum's frequency. Gorn, why do you sit here? He doesn't shift his head, but his lips move, a barely audible, cracked whisper. Not what. When. That is when I move. You look at the massive cylinder in the middle of the hall, which is pulsing with a dull red light. The siren's hum is relentless, a continuous vibrational wall of noise. You realize his purpose is not to guard the door from the people, but to guard the door for the people. He is the human alarm for the systemic failure. You lean back against the wall, now observing the entire hall from the perspective of the secret. The village's vigilance, when viewed from the quiet room, looks desperate, almost frantic. The stacking of stones, the counting of papers, it's all a manic dance to distract the mind from the immense weight of the truth. The obscure or fringe horror tidbit you recall is the Fenian's lullaby. This is an old Irish folk belief that certain tunes played on instruments made from bone or specific types of driftwood have the power to put listeners into a state of suspended animation, not death, but a deep, dreamless, comatose state. The lullaby was rumored to be used by ancient clans to hide their most valuable treasures or weakest members from invaders, sealing them away until the danger passed. You wonder if the siren's hum is in fact an anti-lullaby, a constant screech designed to prevent the Fenian's lullaby from being sung to keep the hidden thing locked down. You try to make sense of the village's logic, this endless cycle of activity and shallow rest. It's a paradox. Historians still argue whether the practice of forced labor under extreme conditions acts as a form of social bonding and therapeutic distraction, or if it merely accelerates the decay of the individual's will and mental autonomy. Here, it seems to be both. They are bonded in their shared purpose, but they are all dying in slow motion. A new thought strikes you. The village is not just protecting itself from the predator in the quiet room, it's protecting the world. If the system fails here, if the wall of consciousness is breached, the blight could spread, infecting the unguarded minds of the entire sleeping world. You realize you are a rookie soldier in a cosmic, psychic skirmish. You look at Elder Gorn again. You feel compelled to offer him some form of comfort, some human connection in this sterile mechanical purgatory. You whisper a joke. I asked Alara if the Wi-Fi was good here. She said, "Why would you need a distraction that facilitates passive mental consumption? I guess they don't understand priorities." Dark joke number 1. Elder Gorn's lips curl slightly, almost imperceptibly, in what might be a shadow of a smile, or perhaps just a twitch of facial fatigue. You return to your Zone 4 post, but you can't shake the image of the quiet room, the black door, and the unmoving guard. You realize that Gorn's silence is a conscious decision. He is maintaining the quiet necessary for the seal to hold. Every whispered question, every dry joke is a tiny tremor in the foundation. You look at the woman with the river stones. She is building a new, more complex pyramid, her fingers moving with the precise, repetitive movements of a clock mechanism. She is currently at 89% activity. You wonder what she dreams about in her shallow, chemically controlled rest. Something simple, perhaps, something harmless. You hope. You try to solve the equation on your handheld counter, but your mind keeps drifting back to Gorn. You consider another dark joke, a way to process the existential dread. What do you call a zombie that only stays awake during the day? A motivated worker. Dark joke number 2, and it almost makes you laugh out loud, a dangerously uncontrolled sound. The air is getting heavier. The hum is pressing down on your skull. You realize the true purpose of the constant monitoring, to ensure that no one person is left alone with their thoughts long enough to ask the real questions. The activity is a shield, the rigidity is the armor, and the black door is the wound they are constantly afraid of reopening. You stand up, feeling the need to move, to be active, to stop the drift. So you walk over to the supply closet and start restacking the perfectly stacked coveralls, your own private contribution to the endless dance of pointless vigilance. You think, I'm just here for the free accommodation, honestly. The existential terror is a bonus. Dark joke number 3. Sure, next rotation is a solo assignment, peripheral patrol. You are required to walk the outer perimeter of the village structures, ensuring all sound-dampening seals are intact and monitoring for environmental incursions. This takes you away from the bright, oppressive light of the main hall and into the dimly lit, rain-slicked corridors that link the buildings. The sound of the siren's hum is slightly muffled here, replaced by a dense, suffocating silence, the quiet that exists after the effort of soundproofing. As you walk, your footsteps echo faintly, and you feel the true, desolate isolation of Eversleep. It's a terrifyingly self-contained world. The focus on internal vigilance is so intense that the exterior world has become entirely irrelevant. You are walking past maintenance panels, ventilation shafts, and thick, insulated walls. It is here, in the isolated quiet of the corridors, that you start hearing the whispers from the shifting shadows. It's not a voice, and it's not the hum. It's a soft, rhythmic thump-thump, thump-thump. It sounds exactly like a heartbeat, but perfectly synchronized, perfectly timed, and far too slow to be human. It's coming from inside the walls, resonating through the cold, slick concrete. You press your ear against the wall, the coldness a sharp contrast to your overheated skin. The sound is unmistakable, a slow, rhythmic pulse. An obscure or fringe horror tidbit you recall is the belief in the walled-up heart, an ancient Eastern European superstition. This lore posits that to seal a boundary permanently, a house foundation, a city wall, a dam, a perfect human heart, still beating, must be enclosed within the structure. The heart beats until it calcifies, and its slow rhythmic pulse creates a psychic barrier that keeps out all non-physical threats. This pulsing you hear is too slow to be a human heart, but it has the same hypnotic, boundary-defining rhythm. You realize the walls of Eversleep are alive, kept that way by some kind of enormous, slow-beating, synthetic rhythm designed to counteract the external blight. You tap on the wall with your metallic rod. The slow pulse stops instantly. You stand motionless, heart hammering in your chest, listening to the vast, heavy silence. After what feels like an eternity, the slow, rhythmic thump-thump begins again, starting low and building in volume, as if the wall itself is sighing with relief that you have gone. Historians still argue whether the psychological effect of a constant, non-biological rhythmic sound, such as that produced by the siren's hum, is more damaging than the terror of complete, unexpected silence in preventing mental stability. You've now experienced both, and the silence, the sudden lack of white noise, is far more paralyzing. The silence allows the slow, terrifying pulse of the wall to enter your mind. You continue your patrol, your senses heightened, your activity bar ticking upward from the adrenaline. You are now hyper-aware of every shadow and every noise. You remember the old man, Elder Gorn, and his focus on the when the hum stops. If the hum is a distraction, the pulse is a deep internal rhythm. If the hum stops, the pulse will become the dominant sound, and Gorn will finally move. The thought chills you to the core. You try to distract yourself with a dark joke. You whispered into the wall, a secret act of defiance. I heard the village tried to save money by switching from the siren's hum to a recorded sound of heavy rain and quiet crying. But everyone started sleeping too well. Dark joke number 1, a little whisper of absurdity against the grim, concrete truth. You notice a small metallic grate on a ventilation shaft, slightly ajar. You use your rod to pry it open, adhering to duties of checking the seals. Inside the shaft, you see a tangle of wires and ducts, and then you see the movement. Not a person, but something else, something organic. It's a network of tiny, hair-thin fibers, black and slick with condensation, that have woven themselves through the ductwork. They are pulsing slightly, in perfect synchronization with the thump-thump from the wall. It's an organic extension of the anti-blight system, a mycelial defense network. The fibers look like an invasive root system, and they seem to be drinking the condensation from the pipes. The mainstream scary fact that comes to mind is the real-world prevalence of Toxoplasma gondii, a parasite that is known to profoundly alter the behavior of its host, particularly making rodents less afraid of cats, thereby facilitating the parasite's reproductive cycle. You wonder if the blight is like that, a cognitive parasite that uses sleep to breed and transfer hosts, and the village's defense system has literally grown into the walls to fight the invasion at a microbial level. The entire village is a giant biological mechanical immune system fighting a metaphysical infection. You gently push the fibers back and seal the grate. You feel a sudden, profound respect for the commitment of these people. They have turned their fear into architecture and their exhaustion into a weapon. You walk past a window and see a group of villagers in the sustenance room, still silently chewing their nutrient paste. They look like pale, synchronized robots. I told my boss I needed to stay hydrated, but this is a little much. No one even has a coffee break. Dark joke number 2. You return to the corridor corner where the pulse was strongest. You realize that the slow, rhythmic pulse is actually a kind of psychic dampener, not a heart. It's a form of ultra-low frequency wave designed to interfere with the low-frequency brain waves of deep sleep. You are walking inside a machine, and the machine is alive. Your peripheral patrol ends with a sense of being watched, not by a person, but by the walls themselves. You think about the sheer endurance required to maintain this level of paranoia. The exhaustion is overwhelming, but the fear of what happens if you give in is stronger. You return to the main hall, the blast of bright light and the siren's hum an immediate, almost welcome assault on your senses. You report your findings to a transition officer, Zone 7 seal intact, ventilation 4B resealed, mycelial intrusion noted but contained, pulse detected. The officer, a young man, simply nods, documenting your report without expression. You're directed back to Zone 3 supply indexing. You try to suppress a yawn. A yawn is a sign of system vulnerability. You try one last weary, dark joke as you start counting bolts. They say counting sheep helps you sleep. I wonder what happens if you try counting these villagers. Does the predator get confused? Dark joke number 3. You know the answer. It probably just gets hungrier. You're back in the main hall, fully integrated into the low-level, continuous vigilance. The rhythm is relentless. Count, sort, solve, monitor. Your own body clock is completely shattered, replaced by the mechanical tyranny of the 4-hour shift. The siren's hum no longer registers as a loud noise, but as a silent, constant pressure, a prerequisite for existence. During a break in your supply indexing task, a brief, sanctioned 2-minute window where you are allowed to lean against a wall, but not sit, you notice a loose floorboard in a storage alcove you're sorting. Curiosity, the one human trait the village cannot entirely suppress, wins out. You pry the board up with the edge of your metallic tensioning rod. Underneath, nestled in the dark, cold space, is a small, water-stained and tightly rolled piece of parchment. It's an old journal entry. It details the experience of an outsider just like you. The date is ambiguous, simply listed as Cycle 14, Phase 3. The writer, an individual named Elias, describes his initial fascination and subsequent terror. This is the memory of the outsider, the chilling account of a failure. The entry reads, "They welcomed me, yes, but they integrated me too quickly. They are not humans, they are a defense mechanism wearing human skin. I saw it today. In the rest cycle, the medication is not to make you sleep, it's to make you small. It shrinks the mind so the predator only smells a single small mouse, not a herd of cattle. They showed me the archives, the history of the blight. But they left out the crucial detail. The blight is not in the ground or outside the walls. It is in the quiet room, and it is not a predator they are keeping out, but a dormant god they are preventing from waking. And the god does not feed on dreams, it feeds on awakening." The text is fragmented and panicked. Elias describes his growing terror, realizing that the system is not sustainable. The vigilance is faltering. "I saw Elder Gorn, not the one now, but the one before. He was smiling in his sleep. A genuine, peaceful, terrifying smile. He found the vulnerability, and the predator, the god, reached him. He cries that Mabel, I know what they do with the unrecoverable now. They don't banish them. They put them in the quiet room to act as a kind of psychic anchor for the god, a little taste to keep it placidly dormant. The door is not a seal, it is a feeding station." The journal abruptly ends there. You quickly roll the parchment back up and replace the floorboard, your heart now pounding a violent, erratic rhythm that feels dangerously out of sync with the slow thump-thump of the wall and the high-frequency thrum of the cylinder. A feeding station. The quiet room is not a jail, it's a containment field that requires tribute. You are performing a low-level repetitive task, which brings to mind the mainstream scary fact of the mandatory ritual in obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD. While OCD is a medical condition, the behavior, the constant, repetitive, often arbitrary actions performed to neutralize an overwhelming sense of dread or perceived danger perfectly mirrors the village's vigilance. They're collectively performing a societal pathological ritual to neutralize the looming psychic dread of the predator's awakening. Their entire society is built on a collective pathological compulsion. You think about Elias's fate. If he found the journal, he must have been caught shortly after. He's likely in the quiet room now, another sleeping sacrifice keeping the dormant god happy. Well, that explains why the old man never moves. Who wants to interrupt someone's dinner? Dark joke number 1. You look across the hall at Elder Gorn. His body is slumped, but his gaze is still fixed. He is the ultimate gatekeeper, guarding the door that is never meant to be opened. He is guarding the feeder. You move back to your index task, counting spools of metallic thread. Researchers disagree on whether the human mind, when deprived of sleep for extended periods, begins to exhibit higher levels of paranoia and conspiratorial thinking, or if the lack of rest simply eliminates the brain's filter, allowing it to perceive genuine, non-visible threats with greater clarity. You are entirely sleep-deprived, and you are entirely convinced this village is built to feed a cosmic horror, which means your paranoia is perfectly justified. You try to focus on the numbers, but the image of the quiet room persists. You realize that the siren's hum isn't just a distraction, it's a lullaby for the god. The monotonous thrum is keeping the thing in the quiet room from stirring fully, creating a psychic blanket of white noise. But a lullaby can change. You look at your handheld counter. It's asking you for the next equation. You feel a wave of despair. There is no escape from the surveillance, no escape from the task, and certainly no escape from the relentless vigilance. You are trapped in a system designed to sacrifice your rest for its survival. You try a second dark joke to dispel the fear. You whisper it, counting the spools. What did the vigilance officer say after he solved all the equations? "I'm so tired, I could just die." Oh wait, that's exactly what the predator wants. You realize that Elias was right. The biggest horror is not in the sleep, but in the awakening. The village is an anomaly, a hyper-alert fortress in a world that spends half its existence vulnerable. You are now part of the reason the rest of the world can still dream their small, harmless, unconnected nightmares. The stakes are global. You finish the indexing and report your status. The officer nods. You are directed back to the rest cycle chamber. You are exhausted, mentally raw, and absolutely terrified. As you swallow the metallic stabilizer, you think of the old man and of Elias, the last outsider. I bet the quiet room has excellent soundproofing, though. Finally, some peace and quiet. Dark joke number 3. You sink into the gray, chemical shallows, praying you don't dream, praying you don't become small enough for the predator to find you. The rest cycle is less a break and more a necessary systemic recalibration. You don't remember falling asleep, you only remember being pulled out of the twilight by the chime, sticky with synthetic sweat and the lingering taste of copper. But this time, something is different. This time, the chemical shallows were breached. You experienced a shared dream. It was brief, instantaneous, and terrifyingly clear. You were not in a dream, but you were suddenly violently aware of being a single note in a vast, terrifying symphony of shared consciousness. You felt the raw, ambient fear of hundreds of minds, all focused on the same central dread. And then you saw it, the immense eye. It wasn't an anatomical eye, but a vast, silent circle of obsidian, impossibly huge, that filled an entire, non-existent sky. It didn't blink. It didn't move. It was simply observing the village below, which looked like a tiny, flickering speck of light in a sea of absolute darkness. The horrifying part was the overwhelming feeling of anticipation that radiated from the eye. It wasn't malicious, it was simply waiting for the table to be set. This collective terror, this shared subconscious vision, is an obscure or fringe horror tidbit that touches on the idea of a universal observer, a non-corporeal entity that exists outside the conventional dimensions of time and space, seeing not individual minds, but the entirety of a collective consciousness as a single, visible entity. The villagers are an organism, and the eye is watching the organism. The intensity of the vision jolts you fully awake, the chime of the cot merely confirming a reality your terror had already established. You sit up, gasping, the metallic taste in your mouth more pronounced than usual. You realize the drug failed, or perhaps the sheer proximity of the quiet room and Elias, the anchor, overpowered the chemical control. You immediately report for your new wake shift, Zone 1, which puts you right next to the massive pulsating cylinder, the siren's hum, and directly opposite Elder Gorn in the black door. You look at the cylinder, it's polished smooth, reflecting the fluorescent light like an oily mirror. You place your hand on it. It's vibrating so fast and deeply that it feels strangely smooth, almost velvety. This constant sound and light is the shield, the noise that keeps the eye from focusing entirely. You wonder if the eye can see you now, a single mind that has just briefly entered its field of vision. The mainstream scary fact that comes to mind is the real-world condition of Cotard syndrome, or walking corpse syndrome. Victims of this rare psychiatric disorder genuinely believe they are already dead, that they lack blood or organs, or that they simply do not exist. They are utterly convinced of their own non-being. This sense of profound derealization is often a side effect of extreme sleep deprivation and anxiety. You look at the villagers, their monotonous tasks, their empty eyes, and realize they are all collectively suffering from a milder, functional form of Cotard's. They are performing actions to prove they are still here, still conscious, still maintaining the wall. They are living ghosts of their former selves. You try to find Alara to report the breach, the shared dream, but she is nowhere to be seen. Instead, you are monitored by a transition officer who looks even more tired than you, his own status bar flickering precariously. You feel a perverse sense of seniority. You've seen the eye, and he hasn't. You know the true stakes. Historians still argue whether the practice of forced communal vigilance in military and survivalist settings genuinely enhances collective security and trust, or if it merely generates a widespread shared paranoia that ultimately leads to internal collapse and mutual suspicion. Here they seem to trust each other completely, but only in the context of the schedule. Any deviation from the schedule is a betrayal. You are tasked with cleaning the floor around the siren's hum cylinder. As you wipe the polished concrete, you notice that the floor immediately surrounding the cylinder is slightly stained, a faint dark residue that seems to absorb the light. It's almost imperceptible, but it's there. You try to make a joke to the transition officer, just to see if he's still human. I'd offer you a coffee, but I'm pretty sure if we introduce complex organic substances like flavor, the whole system collapses. Dark joke number 1, perfectly dry. He doesn't respond. His eyes are fixed on the clock. You look at Elder Gorn, still sitting motionless opposite the cylinder. You realize he has the worst job of all. He has to sit and stare at the feeder, knowing that he is the last line of defense, and knowing that the failure of the system is not his death, but the awakening of the god. You feel a wave of desperate, empathetic horror. You go back to cleaning the cylinder itself. As your cloth wipes the metal, the thrum suddenly spikes, a brief, violent resonance that makes the fluorescent lights flicker. You snatch your hand back. You realize the siren's hum isn't just a white noise generator, it's an irritant. It's actively annoying the thing in the quiet room, keeping it in a state of agitated but still dormant unease. The village is poking the god with a sharp stick, continuously. You find yourself whispering to the cylinder, "You're doing a great job, buddy. Keep it up. Don't let the big eye see us." You are now conversing with inanimate objects, a clear sign of mental decay. You try a second dark joke. Why did the predator cross the road? Because the village left out too many tasty dreaming souls. Dark joke number 2. The rhythmic pulse from the walls returns, a comforting counter-rhythm to your pounding heart. The mycelial network is still active, still reinforcing the foundation. You are surrounded by a layered non-stop defense system, the siren's hum, noise irritant, the mycelial pulse, psychic dampener, and the schedule, collective vigilance. And the quiet room is the center of it all. You finish your cleaning task, but you realize that your shared dream has given you an entirely new, terrifying perspective. The eye is still watching, the hum is still protecting, and you are still awake. This is better than any reality TV show. At least here, the contestants willingly sign up for perpetual misery. Dark joke number 3. You are now truly a part of Eversleep, bound by the secret and the exhaustion. Your rotation moves you to the depths of the central hall, directly to the heart of the constant sound, the siren's hum cylinder. Today is the day you witness the ritual of maintenance. This isn't listed on the standard schedule, but you sense the urgency in the air. The villagers in the main hall are moving even slower than usual, their eyes more glazed, their activity bars hovering nervously around the 75% mark. Something is straining the system. Istainese Actias, Alara and 3 senior vigilance officers approach the cylinder. They are carrying metallic instruments and thick rubberized tubing. The hum, instead of spiking, actually dips in frequency, a profound drop in pressure that leaves the hall temporarily feeling heavy and dense, like being underwater. Alara gestures to one of the officers who carefully unlocks a barely visible panel at the base of the cylinder. As the panel swings open, a cloud of thick, sulfurous steam escapes, smelling of ozone and something metallic like burnt blood. The officer inserts a tube and a thick, dark red fluid is siphoned out into a large chrome tank. This is clearly not water or coolant. Then comes the horror, the blood offering. Alara takes a small obsidian knife and makes a clean, precise incision into the wrist of the second officer. The blood that wells up is thick, almost black, and immediately begins to congeal. Alara catches the blood in a small, ornate silver chalice. She then walks the chalice to the cylinder and pours the fresh, dark blood directly into the open panel. The cylinder absorbs the offering instantly. The dull red light within the cylinder flashes violently, once, and the siren's hum roars back to life, its frequency snapping back into its aggressive, high-pressure mode. The senior officer whose blood was taken simply wraps his wrist with a bandage, his face impassive. This ritual, the act of feeding the machine human blood, is the obscure or fringe horror tidbit you realize the village relies on. This is the concept of a psychic battery, the belief that certain mechanical or protective devices, when tasked with combating non-physical threats, require a small, regular infusion of life energy, specifically human blood, to maintain their efficacy. To maintain the blood is not a lubricant, it's a psychic conductor, a mandatory tribute to the machine that keeps the god dormant. You realize that this entire society is built on a literal, continuous blood sacrifice to a defense system. Researchers disagree on whether the practice of sacrificial bloodletting in ancient cultures was rooted in genuine supernatural belief, or was a purely social mechanism designed to reinforce the power of the ruling class. Here, it's clearly a technological necessity to stave off cosmic annihilation. You are speechless. You try to process the ritual by using dark humor. Well, that's one way to boost employee engagement. If you don't perform, Bob, we'll be needing a donation from your wrist. Dark joke number 1. The sheer chilling practicality of it makes the joke fall flat. For her story at AA, Alara notices you watching. She walks over to you, wiping a smear of the dark blood from her glove. The system requires continuous energy, she states simply, as if discussing a utility bill. When the vigilance falters, the energy must be replaced physically. The blood ensures the frequency is maintained. The blood ensures the hum is singing the right song. And what about Elder Gorn, you ask, your voice tight? Does he give blood? Alara looks across the hall at the unmoving guard. Gorn has given his entire self. He is the battery for the last line of defense. His entire consciousness is now a slow-draining reservoir for the quiet room. He is beyond the need for maintenance. This confirms Elias's words. Gorn is the anchor, the living tribute keeping the god in its shallow sleep. You are now acutely aware of the risk involved in even a moment of distraction. The mainstream scary fact you recall is the real-world danger of the shadow person phenomenon that is often reported during periods of extreme sleep deprivation, often by soldiers, sailors, or medical professionals on long shifts. These are vivid, persistent hallucinations of dark humanoid figures lurking at the edges of the visual field. The hallucination is born of exhaustion, but the fear it generates is real. You realize the entire village is pushing the limits of this deprivation, intentionally flirting with hallucination to stay awake, and the blood ritual is the only thing pulling them back from the psychological edge. You look at the cylinder, now throbbing powerfully with the amplified hum. You feel the constant, heavy pressure against your chest. You need a break, a distraction, something to take your mind off the dark, drying stain on the floor. You try another joke. I suppose this is why Alara is always so pale. She's giving the machine all her color. Dark joke number 2, a slight flicker of your own dark wit. Your shift requires you to now assist the third officer with replacing the siphoned dark fluid with a fresh batch of thick, viscous black oil. It smells industrial, synthetic, and cold. As you carefully pour the oil into the central tank, you feel the heat of the cylinder radiating outwards, a fierce internal furnace. The machine is actively working, actively fighting. You look at the villagers again. They are all back to their tasks, the sudden burst of energy from the ritual seeming to have stabilized their activity bars. They are safe for now. But you realize that every 4 hours, every shallow rest, every ritual is just a temporary measure. The war is not winnable. It is only delayable. You finish your task, your hands now covered in the cold, synthetic oil. You wipe them on your gray coveralls, adding another layer of grim patina to your uniform. You feel utterly drained, but strangely focused. The horror has become mundane. The absurd has become the routine. I guess this is why I never volunteer for office parties. Too much mandatory interaction. Dark joke number 3. You look at the clock. Only 2 more hours until your next rest cycle. You must not dream. The continuous exposure to the siren's hum, the sight of the blood ritual, and the chilling account of Elias have completely warped your perception of time and effort. You are no longer just tired. You are structurally fatigued, your mind running on sheer, panicked commitment. You are in the heart of the village's existential paradox. Your next task is consciousness calibration, a series of tedious, repetitive focus tests performed at a small terminal in Zone 5. As you answer a relentless stream of simple questions, e.g., what is the product of 4 and 12? Is the light green or amber? You start to realize the terrifying sophistication of the defense. The villagers are not merely preventing sleep, they are preventing the collapse of the shared psychic boundary which they have collectively erected. If even one consciousness fully succumbs and drops into a deep REM state dream cycle, it creates a momentary leak, a massive spike of unstructured energy that the dormant predator god uses to gain influence over the entire system. Their vigilance is not about staying awake, it's about maintaining the structural integrity of the psychic wall. This brings you to the core scholarly debate phrasing that defines the village's existence. Researchers disagree on whether the human brain possesses a genuine, measurable psychic field capable of interacting with external, non-physical entities, or if the feeling of shared dread and focused energy is merely a neurological artifact of mutual suggestion and extreme stress. In Eversleep, the answer is clearly yes, and the consequence is the loss of personal autonomy. If one mind encounters a profound spiritual or psychic threat, the other mind instantly becomes vulnerable to the same threat, effectively multiplying the predator's access point. The village is an entire community of potential dream mirrors. They must never, ever dream simultaneously, or the resulting psychic shockwave would be an irresistible feast for the eye you saw in your shared vision. You feel the heavy presence of the quiet room from across the hall. It is the counterpoint to your activity. It is the place where the psychic leakage is localized and managed. You realize the anchor, Elias, or whomever, is the containment breach they allow in order to prevent a complete system failure. They sacrifice one consciousness to save the collective. You notice the woman with the river stones is still at her task, but her hands are bleeding slightly from the friction. She doesn't seem to notice. Her status bar is a solid 90%. She has achieved a functional level of self-harming vigilance. You try to focus on your calibration questions. What is the square root of 64? Your brain is slow, sluggish, but your training kicks in. You answer. You look at the transition officer nearby. He is monitoring the ambient light levels, his movements minimal. You attempt a darkly humorous deflection. You know, I once tried to quit coffee. I ended up seeing the eye in my living room. This village is just one big support group for my addiction. Dark joke number 1, a weary admission of personal collapse. You feel a profound sense of sympathy for the villagers. They are not victims of a cruel dictatorship. They are survivors of a cosmic disaster who have engineered the only possible solution. They gave up their inner lives for the survival of the species. You are halfway through your shift when Alara's voice comes over the internal comms, a soft, precise whisper that cuts through the hum. Attention. All personnel. The ambient pulse frequency has dropped by 0.07. Increase localized task intensity by 10%. System maintenance in Zone 1 is required. Your heart clenches. Zone 1 is the siren's hum cylinder. The machine is failing. The low, rhythmic pulse from the walls, the psychic dampener is weakening. You realize this is the moment of crisis. The defense is faltering, and the dormant god is stirring. You look at Elder Gorn, still motionless, staring at the black door. I bet the quiet room is just wondering why the waiter is taking so long with the appetizer. Dark joke number 2. You instinctively increase the speed of your calibration answers, forcing your activity bar up to 95%. You must be part of the solution, the reinforcing thread in the frayed wall. You realize that your physical exhaustion has been replaced by a deep-seated mental panic, which is a far more effective stimulant. The mainstream scary fact of the Mandela effect crosses your mind. This is the phenomenon where large groups of unrelated people share a false memory of an event, e.g., the Berenstain Bears being spelled Berenstein. This is usually attributed to faulty memory or suggestive misinformation, but what if it's a sign of a localized psychic leak? What if the predator god, when it stirs, sends out tiny, subtle changes to the reality the collective consciousness is holding together, like ripples in a pond, and the village is fighting to keep the pond perfectly still? You finish your calibration task. You look at the clock. You have 1 more hour until your rest cycle. You realize that in this village, the punchline is always the same. What's the motto of Eversleep? Never put off until tomorrow what you can worry about today. Dark joke number 3. You walk toward the cylinder, ready to help with the emergency maintenance, bracing yourself for another blood offering, or perhaps for the final